Hello and welcome to the podcast. My name is Scott Grossclose, and today I have two very special guests. We've been friends for very near 40 years, Margaret and Larry White. These are a few of the many wonderful artists from whom Larry has been musical director, conducted, created orchestrations and arrangements, and coached. Celine Dion, Michael Bublé, Gloria Estefan, Sheryl Crow, the Pointer Sisters, Randy Travis, the Cranberries, Josh Groban, Brian McKnight, Vanessa Williams, Martina McBride, Darius Rucker, Robert Goulet, Susan Anton, Dusty Springfield, Johnny Mathis, Lou Rawls, Tower of Power, Michael Bolton, Dionne Warwick, John Denver, Tom Jones, Engelbert, the Oak Ridge Boys, Kenny Rogers, Charlie Pride, Willie Nelson, Randy Travis, Little Texas, Harry Connick Jr., Nancy Wilson, Sarah Vaughan, The Carpenters, Oscar Peterson, and Ella Fitzgerald, to name a few. So without any further ado, we'll join the conversation as it started. If we met in 84, this will be 40 years coming up.
40 years.
40 years,
Yeah.
a long time to be friends.
That's right.
How did you meet?
Through a mutual friend, Jack Aglash.
Yes.
I was actually living at his house when I moved here for good in 1983. Larry and Margaret came by the house, and I just met him through Jack.
Well, we loved Jack, and Jack was like a second father to Larry. He really looked up to Jack, and I just thought he was one of the funniest people I ever met. I loved him.
Beautiful.
He was interesting. There's two things that were in that house that I would love to have had. First of all, in the living room, he had 5 Cugat, Xavier Cugat paintings.
Yes.
He helped start Charo.
Yeah.
He actually started her, I think, when she was underage. I can't commit to that. But at any rate, he took her from a lounge act and built a show around her, which he did for a lot of people.
Yes.
He'd take a great act like Waylon Flowers and Madam.
Yeah.
Take him from the Cash Bar Lounge to the Congo Room, but you'd have to write a whole show, the whole musical interludes and the arranging, directing, and, the creating. And he found a niche of doing that probably better than any other entertainment director on the Strip, because down the Riviera, you had Sam DiStefano, you had Larry Lee up at the Tropicana, you had Joe Gershio, all these great entertainment directors.
And he also controlled the entertainers better than anybody. When they would get out of line, he'd come in and give them that look and that deep voice, and they would shape up quick.
Yeah, he would tell me, like Mel Torme, one of my favorite singers, on opening night, Mel Torme would just be a nervous wreck. And it was like 30 seconds before he was supposed to go out and entertain his first audience for the week. And Jack slapped him really hard across the face. Just slapped him really, really hard.
Yeah.
And Mel said, "Thanks, I needed that," and walked out and was brilliant. But and entertainers have insecurities, like Johnny Carson. Johnny Carson sit there in the Burbank studios at NBC with Doc Severinsen, 5 nights a week, then 4 nights a week, then 3 nights a week, and then not an hour and a half. And he got very comfortable. But when he went on the road, Doc Severinsen took that time to go build his career and do symphony dates and his own touring. So Jack Aglash was Johnny Carson's entertainment director on the road. And those stories are pretty amazing.
Pretty amazing. Well, and Larry can attest to the insecurities of entertainers. I know one of your favorites was Dusty Springfield. And they did, he was the first actual conductor to ever conduct at Royal Albert Hall. But he tells the story of her being panicked and frightened for each show. And he would have to talk her into it.
Yeah. Pretty crazy.
At Royal Albert Hall, she missed the whole rehearsal. I had written a whole new show. And it was being televised. In fact, it's now a video, the full video. Of her. I think it's one of the only ones.
Larry
where they
looked like a Beatle in those days.
Did a whole show. And I had the orchestra there, and she never showed up. And when I finally saw her, I said, "What? You missed her?" He says, "Oh, we'll be fine. You know what I do." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, I couldn't find shoes to match."
Right?
But she found an excuse.
Yes.
She found an excuse.
Yes.
One time at the Greek Theater, she wouldn't go on, and the people were screaming, "Dusty, Dusty!" It was like thousands of people there. And they had a city ordinance, that the music couldn't go past like 10 o'clock. So I said, "We have to get out there." And she was like panicked. And as soon as I pulled her out there, she she felt
Goes
grunt.
into show
Then she
mode.
went into,
I was always surprised because they did so many shows with Jack where they'd have all the different comedians, and the comedians would sit just so quiet and look so, frail. And all of a sudden, it's their time to go on, and it's like, oh my God, is that the same man that we just saw in the green room?
Mhm.
Yeah, pretty amazing. I had my aunt come to town one time, my Aunt Edna from Denver, my mom's sister, and I said, you're coming next week. Tell me who you want to see. And she said, I want to see Tom Jones. And I said, okay. So I called the entertainment director over at the Bally's. It was in the celebrity room. And he owed me a few favors. So, helped his kid learn to play trumpet and, some things like that. And he said, Scott, I don't have any seats. He said, the casino is screaming at me for more seats. The entertainment directors around town, all the high rollers, the whales are wanting to come, he says, just no seats. And I said, there's nothing you can do. And he said, well, if she can climb a set of stairs. So I said, yeah. So my mom and dad and my Aunt Edna and I, we climbed the stairs and we sit in the light room.
Wow.
Above that beautiful theater looking down. They had 2 couches, really comfortable. It was like the best seats in the house. You're looking right down at the stage. And they were calling the light cues. There was a guy that sat right beside me with a microphone and a headset. It was kind of fun because the guy had a whole score, like 100-page notebook score of the show. And he was calling the light cues live. So he'd go, 3 and 5 were going green, and 3, 2, 1. You hear these big clicks, those little carbine lights, and they would go to green, and it was all live light cues. Well, we move forward. A lady comes in my Green Valley store and buys a piano. And I do a credit app, and I see she works for the Cirque du Soleil, the original Mystère. And as we're talking back and forth about entertainment, I always try to get on a personal level with my clients.
Sure.
And she said, if you ever want to come sometime and hang out in the light room. And I said, sure. So I go over. Now there's a beautiful elevator. It takes you right up to the control room. And there were 6 Macintosh computers sitting in a row.
Wow.
And she says, when I hit this button, 1 hour and 23 minutes and 38 seconds later, the show ends. It's all click track. So you hear this, the musicians around the room, which are kind of embedded in the walls, they just hear the click track. And the whole show starts.
You know that real well.
Yeah. Those computers ran the floor, the elevator. They ran the lights. They ran the music. And you talk about being specific. Those Cirque shows never ran 1 second over or under.
No.
That was really specific.
Well, Larry did the music for many of those shows.
Nice.
Because when you started, you had, a 60-piece orchestra?
Yeah, as soon as they started four-walling, giving the room to the performers, the first thing they did was take my string section, 8 or 10 strings, beautiful all girls dressed in beautiful black, and the band on the other side and a timpani, They said we can't have, so I had to write all those shows down for synthesizers. It was very depressing.
He was the one that was putting all those shows to synthesizer, and it was heartbreaking because it's not the same energy.
No, not at all.
I did the Rockettes show that was at the Flamingo, and it was all on a Macintosh, and it bothered me because the string sound was so cheesy.
Yeah,
I said for $1,000 we can get a synthesizer, and we can have it trigger some nice string sounds.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't pay for it. They said everything is working fine. Let's not change anything. So it just irritated me every time I heard the violins, the cheesy violins from a synthesizer, when I knew it could have been upgraded so for such a reasonable amount.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't pay it.
They didn't want to make the effort because they knew the people from the Midwest just coming in to have a beer, they're not going to know the difference. It's okay.
Correct.
They're just looking for the legs going up.
Correct.
That we will do a future podcast about that subject of when the unions got broken in 82 or 83. The culinary and the musicians union sympathetically went on strike together. And the musician union was fighting to keep these live musicians and no canned music, no tape, no background. And in the middle of that dispute was the Captain and Tennille, great act, Muskrat Love, And it was a very important time because each of the hotels had a hotel orchestra.
Right.
And so sometimes they earned their money, like when you had a Jack Jones or Mel Torme or Barbra Streisand or Liza Minnelli. Of course, you need all the strings, you need the whole thing. But I would go and when they had the comedians at the Sahara, I'd go see a Johnny Carson. They'd play him on with his theme, and they were all in nice tuxedos, looking sharp. One of the best bands in town. A lot of relief players.
Well, you did the same thing talking about click tracks when you were conducting for the Broadway show with Robert Goulet in South Pacific. You had to stick right with the click tracks the same way.
We used a lot of click tracks for pre-recorded things.
Yeah.
Robert Goulet had a song that he sang with himself on the screen. So
it had to be precise.
So it had to be precise. I had the click, myself and the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
And so I could conduct the orchestra based on what I was hearing.
I used to love to sit in the pit with the orchestra better than to watch the show because it was fascinating because things don't always go the way they're supposed to, and they'd have to quickly tell them some of those stories.
I had a drummer, he knows, Santo Savino, who used to fall asleep in the pit. Because there'd be long periods of time when there was no music and it was just dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be, when I stood up, that was the cue for the orchestra to brace themselves for music.
Yeah, if their eyes are open.
Yeah.
Right.
Normally, if I sat, I would be just following the script, and they knew they could relax.
Yeah.
A lot of the violin players would read a book or whatever. But I had a drummer who kept falling asleep. And one time it was right before the music, but it was at a real quiet, dramatic point when Robert was talking.
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to wake him up. I was like throwing things at him, and he was fast. And I woke him up quickly, and he knocked over all the timpanis and all the stuff in the middle of. But Goulet never missed a beat. He went, "The natives are restless tonight." He stayed right in character.
Tell him about the kids that didn't show up one time.
Oh, that happened a lot. We had matinees. There were two kids that start off South Pacific, and they sing the first song after the overture. And it was lunchtime, and they didn't show up for the matinee.
Wow.
So I start the overture, Bally High, and the orchestras and string, and I see the light of God, which was the director's light, come on, flashing. And just the kids are not here. So those moments happened a lot. So I held up like their music and went like this. And we went right to the next piece of music.
Wow.
You had to be ready for, you knew you were going to get through from A to Z, but you didn't know quite what the path was to get there.
Right.
People would forget lines.
Yeah, or lyrics.
Or lyrics.
Goulet would do that.
Mm-hmm.
Make up his own, and it was great.
It was quite a mental exercise.
Yeah, but that's the beauty of live theater because it's all happening right there.
Yes.
And you get to feel the energy, you get to feel the excitement. And sometimes those moments where things don't go as planned, they create the greatest energy.
The greatest moments. Exactly.
Yeah.
So it was always fun being in the pit because musicians were just funny too.
Yeah.
Great senses of humor.
Yeah. So you've done a lot of work here in Vegas and in Broadway?
In Broadway, also television.
Yeah.
I did a lot of the variety shows, the music for them. The Carpenters, Tom Jones,
Johnny
Engelbert.
Mathis,
Engelbert, all the people that my students don't know who they are.
Teaches at Family Music.
Oh,
You do? Which Green Valley store?
Green Valley.
Nice.
Yeah.
We kind of feel that it was, we were there when Scott started it, so it felt like family. I always think of you when we walk in.
They just passed 1.5 million private lessons since 1995.
Think of the good you did.
Wow.
That's a lot of
That's
lessons.
amazing.
A lot of teachers. At one point, we had 72 teachers.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you talk about the history of Las Vegas. Larry actually started working in Las Vegas when he was 4. And he was tap dancing with Donald O'Connor. And they did a show together. And he had billing at the Sahara with Donald O'Connor.
That was the Stan Irwin days.
Mm-hmm.
So that was fun. And then some of the people that you met when you were doing that, I know that the one that brought you the clock. Tell them that story.
Okay. Very interesting. I had a sister who was a big, huge talent, 2 years younger than I was. And everybody wanted to record her, from Bobby Darin, who was popular then, and Eddie Fisher, who was popular. We went with his manager. Anyway, we came to Las Vegas, and Liberace heard her, and he actually canceled, and I don't know if it was by ability alone, but he was doing a date in Tahoe, and he canceled his opening act, who was Barbara Streisand.
Wow.
And I have a feeling it was because of maybe personal discrepancies, but he brought my sister, and I played piano for her. So we went up to Tahoe, and we did like 30 minutes before he came on. But between shows, he used to take me to gamble. And they were very lax with gambling then. They'd rope off a couple of machines, put a rope so we'd be, and 2 stools so we'd be, and he'd take $100 from the cage every night. And he'd split it with me, and we'd play the machines.
And how old were you?
At that time, I was probably 10 or maybe 10 or 11. It probably would have been frowned on today.
You think?
Yeah, I
but
think
it was,
so.
but it was all really with good intentions.
Right.
And then he took me to the gift shop one night, and he said, "I need to get a gift for somebody. Is there anything here that appeals to you?" And I saw a little clock in a guitar. And I said, "That's really amazing." He says, "Well, I'll keep that in mind." Anyway, closing night, that's what I got.
Nice. Would have been better for you to go to a car lot or something,
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny story. Jack Aglash was promoting Charo, and it moved her, from a $5,000 a week act to a $100,000 a week act. And she wanted to buy Jack a Rolls Royce. And he says, "Are you crazy?" You remember Ed Nigro, some of the people there, right? But it would have been very bad for Jack to receive this, flamboyant gift and drive up every day in a Rolls Royce. So he said, "Absolutely not." So it was Neil Aglash's 16th birthday, and Charo comes over and picks him up at the house on 17th Street, takes him out and buys him the car that's sitting in the middle of the showroom, a Trans Am with this big bird on the front hood, all painted up. And when Jack came home, he says, "Whose car is that?" And Shirley said, "Oh, Charo bought that for Neil's birthday." And he went ballistic,
Oh.
But yeah, those days, that happened a lot with people. It was interesting.
Well, one of the stories that Donald O'Connor told us, because Larry worked with him later and conducted for him.
But
and he talked
which
about
one are
that,
you talking?
where he drove into the...
Oh, he used, well, he's gone now. I don't think he'll mind me
He
saying
told
that
us
he
the
used to
story.
drink a lot.
Yeah.
And there was one time when he actually drove his car into the casino
Wow.
and gave the keys to one of the workers there.
He had great stories.
To his room. When I was 7, I did an act with him that was choreographed with dance and everything. And I would sit in the audience as a kid with my dad and have dinner. And he would do his show, and he had a routine where we'd throw a hat out into the audience, and people would throw it back, and he'd have to catch it on his head.
Right.
So he did that for a while, and then ultimately he would throw it to me, and I would put it on my head and keep eating. And so somebody tell that kid he's got to throw it back. Anyway, he finally gets mad and comes out into the audience, pulls his hat off my head. Then he, as like a second thought, he drags me up on stage, and I'm like scared to death, and he's making jokes. This is that's where the ladies close that door. That's where they dress. And this is the stage and the orchestra, whatever. He says, "Have you ever been on a stage before?" He wants me to say a few words to my dad, and I won't go near the microphone. He finally pushes me forward, and I go start doing a routine.
Right.
And then the music starts, and I do a dance routine, and he's like floored.
Yeah.
He said, "You said you'd never been." I said, I meant this stage. And that's when the act went on. Yeah. So I did this whole thing with him. It was wonderful.
I don't go to the Strip much. I spent 30 years, a couple nights a week on the Strip, and I stay locked behind the gates here at the house and pretend I'm, in some Caribbean island and go out and swim in the pool. But every time I drive to the Strip, there's something that I haven't seen before.
Yes.
And that's kind of human nature. You drive the same way to work every day, and all of a sudden you notice there's a donut place or
Right.
or Italian restaurant you never notice. But on the Strip, it really does change
It's like
every
a new
week.
hotel. Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty strange. There's still great entertainment. I've had the occasion the past week or so to see a couple shows. One, the Great Smith Center, one of the new Broadway theaters in the country. Myron Martin does a great job. He was an old Wurlitzer piano rep. I've known him for years,
Oh,
too.
nice.
I saw the musical Annie. But what was fun is that every seat was sold. The
Perfect.
culture, I spent 8 years on the board of Nevada Opera Theater, and I don't really like opera, but the family music was
Sure.
good to be involved in the community.
Sure.
But a lot of sophistication. But for me, it's the technology that's changed it so great.
Yes.
If you go see Christina Aguilera's show or any of these residents shows, the technology is incredible.
Now, there's one show we went to, and I was really, friends invited us, and I didn't expect I would really like it. And I'm trying to think of the name, but it was like the Jersey Boys, but now it's their kids performing,
Mm-hmm.
and they were fabulous. You were impressed with the music.
Was it the Bronx Bombers?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was
Mhm.
really a lot
Yeah,
of
great
fun
show.
to see the young people playing so beautifully and carrying on the tradition. I really liked that.
I'm going tonight at 7:00 to the Bally's in the Celebrity Room, which used to be, one of the best rooms in town. And they have a big production show, and it's the Plate Spinner.
Oh, fun.
And it's the three guys in the motorcycle that ride in the cage of death,
okay.
Oh, yeah.
It's a true variety show. They have 20 acts
We loved that. Well, you did Splash. Was that what it was called?
at the Riviera.
At the Riviera.
Riviera.
Jeff Kutash. Yeah,
And they
Splash.
had all the different acts, and it was always fun.
I lost my lease at the Plaza Hotel. I had 5 very good shows a day running the Comedy Zone, which I actually owned. And Dick Clark wanted that room, and he was going to do Rock, Roll, and Remember. And they were so excited about having, Dick Clark's Rock, Roll, and Remember that they canceled my entire lease.
Oh,
when it came
no.
out. So I had to get rid of these shows. And one of them was a multi-million-dollar magic show with white tigers, Dirk Arthur.
Wow.
If you ever
Dirk Arthur, sure.
if you ever look on the internet and look at his Animal Planet special, it shows him swimming with the big 600-pound tigers and things.
Oh, my goodness.
really incredible. But Dirk went and made a deal with Jeff Kutash at the Riviera to move his show up there. He was the headliner for Splash for a while.
Oh.
But I don't know if I can even tell this. Well, I'll tell it. We can cut it. His manager, Debbie Bibby, was a dear friend of mine. He wasn't going to include her in that move because he had negotiated at that time, I think it was $18,000 a week. And so her commission was, $1,800 a week, and he owed her some money already.
Mm-hmm.
So I mentioned it to a friend of mine, Michael Gardner, a billionaire from Broadway, and he called Meshulam Rickless, that owned the Riviera, and said, call down to Stefano's office. Don't let this guy come on property until he takes care of his manager.
Good for you.
And he called, and Dirk called and says, come over and pick up a check. It was like $18,000. She needed it and deserved it, earned it.
That's right.
And to this day, she's a dear friend. And every time I talk to her, she thanks me for getting her money.
Well, that's right.
But,
and people never know who they're talking to.
Right.
I remember when we lived in LA, the woman who was Kathy Hilton's mother was my best friend since I'm 19. And we were at some private club, and I got up to go to the restroom, and Prince had all of his entourage there. And one of the bodyguards said, you're too close to Prince. You've got to back up. And I said, then get him out of the way of the ladies' restroom.
Oh.
So then Prince didn't like that I spoke to his guard. So he went to Rick Hilton, who was involved some way, and said, I want her to leave. And he says, well, we call her Aunt Midge here, and so you have to leave. They just assumed here's a nobody I can push around, but you never know who people know, right?
Right.
Well, that's an interesting thing. In most cities around the world, it's who you know. In
Yes.
Vegas, it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Yes, that's true.
And that's kind of that's the power play going back 40 years of the history in this place. It was kind of fun selling really expensive European pianos like Börsendorfer's, $150,000. Is that a lot of those higher end management people came in the store. And so I got to meet a lot of the hotel owners and managers. And there was a dwindling number of actual owner operators. The last one being the Johnson family over at the Westward Ho. and Ralph Engelstad up at the Imperial Palace. Do you remember him getting in trouble here with the Hitler birthday party?
Oh,
No,
God, that should do it.
I would have remembered that.
Oh, no, it was, he had the auto collection there at now Harrah's. It was the Imperial Palace, and it was a privately owned casino. I mean, no board of directors and no corporate things. It was Ralph Engelstad. So every year he had this kind of a private party, big party, 300 people, and he would roll that beautiful Mercedes convertible that you see pictures of Hitler in a lot.
Oh, my God.
He had the actual car. Some people would dress up in Nazi uniforms and things. Well,
Oh, my God.
it horrified. And Larry, you can kind of attest to this. There was a Jewish contingent on the Strip, hotel owners, hotel managers,
Yes.
entertainment directors, and they called them the Smobsters. They
that's-
really controlled that little tight knit thing.
Yes.
And they all got together and almost had Ralph Engelstad's license pulled. They fined him $100,000, which back then was a lot of money, but they let him keep his casino. But the corporations were trying to get rid of the private operators because they had cheaper drinks and cheaper.
Yes.
They were still running things the old way.
Right.
When the corporations came in at food and beverage, the entertainment, everything had to be a profit center. So all the comps and all the cheap prices and the $9 steak and lobster dinners, they were all disappearing. But these last holdouts, boy, the corporations wanted to get them out of the way.
I remember hearing people complain that when they would lose $50 or $100 at the tables and they'd go in to have breakfast and coffee was $4. They'd say, what is this? Yeah.
Yeah.
Howard Hughes had a hotel across from where he lived at the Desert Inn on like one of the top floors called the Silver Slipper.
Yes.
Remember that they had a 99-cent breakfast. And it was just amazing. It was 2 eggs and bacon and toast and coffee and juice. And, it's hard to find those deals anymore.
Rip Taylor used to always say, all you can keep down for 99 cents.
He was funny. Larry did a show that was Robert Goulet, Donald O'Connor, Debbie Reynolds, and Rip Taylor.
Wow.
I had
That's
the
all I know.
orchestra at the Aladdin.
Oh,
And
that's great.
That's
It was together again for the first time.
I love that.
It was
Yeah,
wonderful. And we had the opening party at our home. We lived on Pam in those days, close to Wayne Newton. And Robert used to like to come to our house because we had all these animals. We had a pet pig. And after this party, somebody came up and said, was that Robert Goulet wrestling a pig on your front yard? And I
No.
said, you got to get off the cheap booze, really. But it was. He loved to come and play with our animals.
And Robert loved his wine.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, tell that story. You can now.
I can tell. Well, he had a special wine that it was a Montrachet and it was a certain year. I'm recollecting that it was like 87 or something. And the sommeliers and all the staff would run to different hotels to get it. They'd be scurrying because he was coming up for dinner.
Mhm.
So, and they'd always have it for him. Anyway, fade out, fade in. I'm living in LA and I'm producing and arranging an album for him. So he said, we'll just fly up and you'll stay at the house and we'll work on the album. So he picks me up in the Batmobile, but it was a Stutz, but I called it the Batmobile.
Mhm.
And he said, before we go home, I have to stop at Smith's to pick up some wine. And he comes out to the car with a case of Blue Nun. I said, what happened to the Montrachet with the 87? And
It's different when you're buying, right?
yes, is that great?
He had a lot of fun with him.
Yeah, he's a great act. Vera was a little difficult at times, but Robert was a sweetheart.
Yeah.
Well, I'm kind of the reason Larry stopped
Oh,
working with them.
is that an interesting story?
It's pretty interesting, I
All
think. I had been a mortgage banker. Entertainment was completely new to me, and they would do a show first before they take it to Broadway, and they did it in Orange County.
Hmm.
Well, Larry had always told me about this wonderful woman who was like a mother to him on the road, Gloria, right? And so I was happy to meet Gloria, and she had just had back surgery. I think maybe she was in her mid 60s, and so we're after the show. Vera turns to her and said, Gloria, pick up that box. Well, it was a big, heavy box. The woman is in her 60s. She just had back surgery. So I said, let me carry that for you. That's how I was raised, right? You step in and help with a senior. So Vera turned to me and started poking me in the chest. And she says, she works for me, and you never interfere with somebody who works for me. She's physically poking me. Well, I'm a cowgirl. I don't play that, right? So I grab her hand and I pull her face right up to me. And I says, I don't work for you. And if you ever speak to a human being like that in front of me again, I will throw you through a window, and flipped her back.
Very nice.
So anyway, they went to Larry, of course, and this was right before New Year's. So you got to get rid of her. You know, we can't, she's got to go. And lucky for me, he didn't do that, but it was the last time that they worked together.
You know, Vera is the reason why I joined the board on the Nevada Opera Theater. Robert had agreed to do a free performance, and after the performance, they received about a week later a $1,500 bill.
Oh my God!
There was $200 for Tuck's dry cleaning. There was a limo. There was the things that she brought to the dressing room that she thought it should have been in the writer. And so I went on joined the board, and we straightened that out. And they were about $15,000 or so upside down in the opera. This is, of course, early 90s. And it took us 8 years. But I'm happy to say that the opera today is doing very strong.
Oh, that's
they're doing
wonderful.
they're doing 3 full productions.
I'm Italian. My mother loved the opera, so she would be happy to hear that.
And to be honest, I'm not really an opera fan. And the other board members were 5 ladies. And so I brought a little testosterone to the group.
There you
But
go.
yeah, it was fun. It was.
Well, she just, many times when people marry a star, they start believing they're the star, right? And that was the case because Robert was wonderful. He was funny. He was fun. He was down to earth. We loved him. But she just offended people everywhere we went.
Yeah.
Tell them the Sinatra story. That's a funny one.
Frank had been in the dressing room. We came back to the Desert Inn. They were trying to have a conversation, and she kept interrupting. And Sinatra turned to her and said, "Shut the F up." And she was stunned, but she kept quiet.
Wow.
And the Easter bonnet story, that's really a good one.
These are,
Well,
should we tell
we're
these
having
stories?
fun. We
Yes.
should. When you're ugly, sometimes.
It was the Saturday night before Easter Sunday. She tried to tell Robert how to take a bow, and he became incensed. He became furious, and he picked her up by the head. It was like, "Robert, put me down." He actually had her off the ground with her legs flailing. "Robert, put me down." Everybody clears out of the dressing rooms. I see her. She said, "Larry, are you coming to Easter Sunday tomorrow?" I said, "Well, yeah, we'll be at the house." She said, "And what are you going to bring me?" I said, "A steel-plated Easter bonnet."
Oh,
I know.
Oh, that's a good story.
That's a funny one.
Did you ever go to the Sahara House on the golf course? Remember when the Sahara owned the Sahara Golf? It's now the International on the
No,
Desert
I
Inn.
don't think I've ever been.
The big stars didn't like to stay on property because they were constantly being, bombarded. Right.
Sure.
But the Sahara smartly bought a house, and it was security guarded. And people like Carson would finish broadcasting at 4:30 on a Friday night and get on Phyllis McGuire's jet from Burbank and fly into Vegas. But he would never stay on the property. So as soon as he finished his show, he was out the back door. It's at that property that some of the fun Vegas stories are told.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah,
We'll go into more of those later, but fun stuff. A lot of people never know that this exists because you're not invited in. But behind the MGM Grand Hotel, which at one point was the largest hotel in the world, 5,400 guest rooms. Put that in perspective. If you were to sleep a different night in each room, it would take you 14.5 years
Oh, my
to
goodness.
sleep through that hotel. but they have a thing called the mansions.
Larry actually was one of two piano
I can
players.
verify that.
On the top floor, the backside of the mansions, is a 22,000 square foot penthouse, and that's where they put their residents. So right now, through the end of Christmas, this is now day after Thanksgiving, is where Usher is staying.
Oh.
And, they have, this 20,000 square foot is like 6 bedrooms.
Well, they have a piano in there, and Larry was one of two people that would sit and play the piano in the mansion. And he couldn't even tell me who was staying there
Right.
because they would have different people. And it was, he
You can't rent those rooms. You can't go to the front desk and say, I'd like to book a night.
One night they had the Russian mob there. And so they asked him for a folk song, and I'll be damned, he played it.
Wow.
And I only heard, he wouldn't tell me anything, but one of the people that was there said, you won't believe what he did last night.
Yeah, I also did the Brown Derby, where I
In
sang
Beverly
and
Hills?
played it. No, the one at the MGM. on
Planet
the lower
Hollywood.
level.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And Tom Jones used to come down and sing tunes. Even after he's done 2 shows, come down and sing show tunes.
Well, and he invited you to some Italian restaurant. Again, after doing 2 shows, he would wake Larry up and have him come to some and sing all night.
Nice.
But one night there was my favorite story. There was a Mike Tyson fight because that big arena lets out right next to the Brown Derby. So all of a sudden, it emptied out, and I guess security hadn't thought ahead because there were a lot of gangbangers and people. It was the Compton crowd, and they were worried.
Tupac was killed that night, wasn't it?
I'm not sure.
Think so.
Anyway, all of these people coming out and the security rushing, and a whole group of them came in and sat right around me at the piano. And one gentleman said, do you take requests? And I'm thinking, oh my God. I said, well, I'll try. He said, do you know My Funny Valentine? How could this guy with the chains all around and the tattoos and
And we heard on the news that there was all this trouble, so I was so worried. And he came home with a wad of $100 bills. They had him play Sinatra music all night.
That's great.
You were in the safest place you could be.
Yes.
who knew? Yeah.
Wow.
Just the sheer number of really cool venues in town makes it difficult to kind of have one place.
Yes.
But if you go backwards 40 years, there was one place in town after midnight and well into 4 or 5 in the morning where all the stars up and down the strip would usually do a cameo, come in and drop in. That was the Casbar Lounge at the Sahara. Remember those days?
Yes.
I would walk in. There would be, like you say, Robert Goulet or whoever was in the main room and Jack, and it would just be talking. Then next to them would be, I think, the short person that would juggle a chainsaw, a bowling ball, and a golf ball.
Oh, no.
It kind of almost circus stuff, and it would just be this conglomeration. And that was, and they also on Tuesday nights had the Terry James open mic, kind of a talent showcase. It's hard to find that anymore.
Well, and there was an after hours breakfast place, Jazz and Eggs,
right?
And at Debbie Reynolds.
Mm-hmm.
And
that was later.
That was later, and all the people would come in and stand up and do one song. It was nice.
I'm going to be calling Joey Singer. You know Joey, right?
Of course.
Great guy. Actually, I had your stuff out because I'm going to be talking to you about a violin singer that I'm working with Jackie Baskow to do a show for. So,
well, Joey actually was conducting for Debbie Reynolds when they did the show that was Goulet and
oh yeah.
So Joey was conducting.
Joey was conducting for Debbie,
and then Tim Fowler.
Tim Fowler was conducting for Donald.
And you
O'Connor.
had Robert, right?
And I had Robert and a comedian.
Yeah.
You know Mike Pretty? Mike Pretty from the Smothers Brothers, musical conductor.
Yeah. Not well, but I...
Yeah. It was funny because these guys, we recognize singers. When you hear the radio, you just know the voice.
Right.
I was kind of like that with the pianist.
Oh.
And so they would come in. Oh, who was Frank Sinatra's conductor for a long time?
Vinny
Falcone, right. I would be at my desk at the Green Valley store, and he would come in. His wife would be shopping at Trader Joe's, so he'd have 30 or 40 minutes, and he'd always migrate over to one of the European pianists and sit down. And I could tell within maybe 3 or 4 bars
yes, They have
that was Vinnie Falcone.
Yes.
I knew that time, that
That
signature,
sound.
right? And I would hang up real quick who I was talking to and go and pull a bench up in the curve of the piano. And for 30 minutes, I had maybe one of the best piano players in the world. I mean, he was just
He was wonderful.
6,000 arrangements, in his
Yeah.
head. He was just
Wonderful.
amazing. Yeah, he died, about 3 years ago.
He
Yeah.
did, but Larry did Frank Sinatra's 80th birthday in Palm Springs, which was really fun. There's some fun stories about that too. But afterwards, one of the things I always wished we had on tape, he came up to Larry and said, I hope you keep playing because in my opinion, you're the best jazz pianist alive today.
He must have been drinking a lot to come up with that.
But that was really, I was like shocked. That was
I
something
have a
nice
great
to hear.
Vinny story. We were in Atlantic City, and Robert calls me up, a Goulet, and says, let's go over. Pia Zadora is opening tonight, and Vinny is conducting for him. So we went over there, and she got mad and threw a water bottle at him for some reason, and we left.
Oof.
That'll do it.
Now, Pia Zadora was married to Michelle Enriquez?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And when she first started, she was having trouble getting gigs. So he quietly, when they would book, would guarantee that they would buy a full page ad in like Variety, would market and promote so that people showed up to the show. But yeah, she was a great talent. Well, did you ever work with Jerry Lewis on the telethon?
Oh, for many years.
Yeah.
For many years.
Jack did that show. As a
Right.
matter of fact, one of the most touching moments I remember about Jack was they moved the show from Caesar's Palace because of Jack. They moved it down to the Space Center behind the Sahara. In the last few years, it was there. And then they finally ended up doing it at the Beverly Hilton because the stars didn't have to drive far and they could, come do their cameos. So I watched the show at the Beverly Hilton. It was Jack's last show. He was actually in a wheelchair.
Oh.
And he conducted,
Wow.
And after the show, I sat there and I watched all of these band members come up and take their picture and get his autograph.
He was loved.
He stayed there for an hour before everybody got a chance. They all had tears in their eyes because they knew it was his last
Oh
time.
my God.
But-
He was my buddy. We loved McDonald's.
Oh,
And Shirley wouldn't let him have them, and Larry wouldn't let me have them. So every once in a while, he'd say, "Kid, you feel like a Big Mac?" I said, "Yeah, I'll meet you there."
I did the chart on You'll Never Walk Alone.
oh, I love that. The way he ended every telethon for
Yeah.
25, 30. He raised over $3 billion.
Amazing.
For
Wow.
muscular,
Just
$3
amazing.
billion.
Wow.
And it was a big honor to be on that band because he had first choice of every musician. And that was the one time they would come together and have just top players on every position. They loved it.
I got a Macintosh computer when they first came out, and I learned the spreadsheet. And Jack said, "Can you help me with the payroll for the telethon?"
Wow.
And I thought, okay, well, you put a couple of fields in, you kind of connect them. So when you change 1 hour, it changes to the health and welfare. And, but there's, as you know, Larry, there's doubles and
Yeah.
triples. So if a saxophone player plays the flute
yeah.
and then the clarinet, they earn money for each of the instruments, the complexity. And then there's the rehearsal pay. There's the live performance pay. Then there's the video, the telephone, So it was a complex thing. When I finished, I didn't realize how much work I had agreed to give to Jack. Was like you, my second father.
Yes, he was
But
wonderful.
yeah, it was like, I won't say the number, but you can imagine it was hundreds of
a
thousands
lot
of dollars.
of work.
So I'll tell you one last story about Jack real quick. I was managing a store called Music World on Sahara and Eastern. I actually started there in 1980 when it was Southern Nevada Music.
Wow.
But this little 14-year-old girl comes in with her parents, and they ask for the owner, Don Kemp. And I went back to the kitchen and I said, "Don, there's a couple here with a little girl that wants to see you." And he goes, "I can't see them now. I'm late to my Rotary Club." He says, "You take care of them." And he actually left the building. He walked out the back kitchen door and got in his car and left.
Oh, no.
So I walked up to these people and I felt really bad because they told me they had driven all the way up from Lake Havasu.
Oh, my goodness.
And I said, "Well, I'm sorry that, Don can't see you, but if you come upstairs, I have a 9-foot grand and I'd love to hear you play." So the girl goes upstairs and I swear to you, perhaps maybe the finest musician I've ever seen in my life
Oh
at
my
14.
goodness.
She just was playing these really complex pieces. So after 3 or 4, I went to the phone. I called Jack, who lived just down the street, 3 blocks away. And I said, Jack, I've got this incredible pianist. And I said, you have to see her. Please, can I bring her over? And he says, sure. I said, I close the store at 6. I'll be over at 6:15. And these folks were in such a financial situation that they were going to sleep in their station wagon.
Oh my goodness.
Instead of driving back, to Lake Havasu. So I invited them to stay at my house. I called my mom and dad.
Oh,
I says,
nice.
we're
And
having
your parents were the best.
Dean and Opal, they were the
I
greatest.
love them.
But Dad had to sleep with Mom that night.
Oh.
Kicked him out of his bedroom.
Took one for the team, right?
Right. After 3 sons, he found out what was going on. And at any rate, so I show up at 6:15. Remember, Jack had that Yamaha piano there in the living room underneath the Cougars that I wanted so much.
That's right.
And this little girl, very cute, kind of chubby. And she said, Mr. Aglash, what would you like to hear? And Jack said, well, you just play what you want to play. And she says, well, I know 6,500 arrangements.
Oh, my God.
Well, you would think that's, bullshit. Like, there's no way. And I was even thinking, bullshit. So she says, no, honestly. And her father said, Jack, go ahead. Give her what you want. And Jack said, well, do you know how to play Autumn Leaves? Now, you and I both know, Larry, that Autumn Leaves is so difficult. Roger Williams, that run, the autumn leaves, and that trill down where the leaves are falling.
Right.
Yes.
That's a finger twister. And a lot of musicians practice a whole lifetime to get that run down. Well, she says to him, which version? And Jack goes, pardon? She goes, you want to hear Autumn Leaves? Which version? And he goes, well, what versions do you know? She says, I know 6 of them.
Oh, my God.
And Jack says, you know 6 versions of Autumn Leaves? She goes, yeah. She says, I know the Roger Williams. I know the Oscar Peterson. I know the Art Tatum. And her father said, just blend them. So she starts off, she turns around, the first song she plays, she sits down, and she plays the Roger Williams version. And then she goes into some Art Tatum, some George Shearing block chords.
Oh, my God.
Comes back. The Oscar Peterson was the last thing with a running bass,
Oh.
And so Jack is now completely
in love.
Yeah. It was insane. So he asked her another piece and another piece. And, his musical encyclopedia in his head.
Huge, yes.
As a matter of fact, when he died, I helped to get some of his charts sent up to the UNLV for preservation purposes.
Oh, wonderful.
But so he's just knocked out by this girl. And the father says to Jack, ask her to change keys. So she'd be in the middle of this really, really great piece. And Jack would say, take that up a third. Take that down. She was just later, she lived at my house for about a week.
Oh, my
Because
gosh.
Jack reached behind that Princess phone behind the ridiculous big brown couch and called. He says, Sherry, is Jerry in? I didn't know who he's calling. It was Jerry Lewis. And Jerry got on and Jack says, listen, I've got this incredible talent I want to put on the show, which was just about 12 days away. And they'd already booked and charted and blocked all the entire 22 hours of the show. And Jack said, I'll make it work. Just, you got to have this girl on. So Jack wrote a 6-minute piece, which started with Rhapsody in Blue, went into Art Tatum's Tiger Rag,
Oh, my goodness.
and went through these variations. And I did a little dinner for, it was an odd grouping. It was Phyllis McGuire and Bobby Stupek and Rich Little and his new girlfriend at the time. Anyway, we had this little dinner for about 14 people. And everybody tried to steal her that week.
I bet.
The Sahara Hotel.
Do you remember her name?
Yeah, I do. She was just on doing a broadcast yesterday on YouTube. She lives in Phoenix. Nicole Pesci.
Oh, my goodness.
You look her up, and one of these nights I'll have you over. We'll do a little video montage of some of her stuff. But Paul Loudon, the Sahara.
Sure.
Well, Sue Loudon bought her the dress she wore.
Oh, how wonderful.
And Phyllis McGuire came and said, do you think we can have a private party at my house? The big 40,000 square foot Rancho Circle house.
Sure.
One of the more interesting homes I've ever been in. 40,000 square feet. Have you ever been over to Phyllis's house?
No, I've heard about it.
It has a 3-story Eiffel Tower. She serves under it. She has a 5,500 square foot room of antiques.
My goodness.
I went over one time. She says, I just bought this. It was a wooden confessional from an old Catholic church in Europe. Just a weird collection of stuff. And because she was married to Sam Giancana,
Okay.
we all know Sam died from lead poisoning, 6 cases.
Yeah.
But, and as you went down the stairs, he built a bomb shelter when he built the house.
Oh, my God.
And after Sam left us, she turned that into a dance floor and things. So you'd go down, and as you went down the wall, when you go into entertainers' houses, you see pictures of other entertainers. When you went down that wall, it was leaders of the world, Charles de Gaulle and he and Sam and her.
Wonderful.
It was really interesting. Well, and I hope I can tell this story. So Phyllis has this party of about 100 people, and we bring the little girl over, and Phyllis introduces her. And after the party, I'm trying to stick next to the girl because I want to represent her.
Sure.
Jack Aglash wanted to represent her. My entertainment attorney, Mark Trados in town, he wanted to represent her. Of course, Sue Loudon wanted her.
Sure.
Phyllis McGuire wanted her. But in the after party, I saw that Phyllis and the mother and the dad and another guy who I didn't know had sequestered over next to the bar. And I started to walk over, and Bobby Stupik stepped right in front of me. And I started to step to the right, and he stepped to the right. I stepped to the left. He was
Definitely blocking.
blocking. And at one point, he raised his right shoulder back so that I could see a pistol
Oh, wow.
under his jacket. Now, he built the Stratosphere,
Yes.
and he was ran for mayor. But he absolutely was blocking me from getting over there because her entertainment attorney, she'd flown in from New York, was trying to steal this girl.
Oh, my
Well,
goodness.
even Jerry Lewis wanted her, but Jerry
Sure.
Lewis did hire her for a year, $1,500 a week, and Jerry would go out and do his concert dates, and he would introduce the girl. He would say, "Oh, I found this girl in Las Vegas," one of these things,
Sure.
and it would give him like 14, 16 minutes to go change, smoke a cigarette, relax
Sure.
a bit. Then he'd come back on, and then he'd bring her out for an encore, a bow and things. But she traveled with Jerry for about a year and a half. And just to understand Jack, the father went to Jack and says, I think she should be earning more money. She was getting standing ovations. At the telethon, she got what I think was maybe one of the longest standing ovations of any act on the telethon.
My goodness.
They stood up for 2 minutes. And
we
Jerry,
were probably there because
Yeah.
we were at all of them.
yeah, she played a 9-foot white Kimball of all pianos.
Wow.
It's okay. Ooh, but they sponsored this.
That hurt you,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, it hurt bad. But any rate, she was just amazing.
Wonderful.
And but everybody was fighting over her, and her father was very strange. And we tried to ask, how he taught her, because he would never tell, and she promised him that she would never tell. They stayed for about a week at my house, and I had a 5'7" Yamaha in my bedroom. They would shut the door, and I would stand outside and listen. And she would do these really ridiculous exercises, really complex stuff. And I sure wish she would open up, because she has a gift that should be shared, but she made a promise to her dad.
Well, maybe now they might, because that would be something wonderful to share if they would.
Yeah, I hope she does. But yeah, you never know. What I'm saying is we had so many teachers teaching lessons, and of course, they used the West Sahara Store concert hall free for
Right.
recitals.
Yes.
And every once in a while, you see this young
Prodigy.
this person come along. It almost makes you embrace Shirley MacLaine's concept of reincarnation.
Sure.
It's like, how?
And you knew Jerry since you were a young boy.
I have a picture with Jerry holding me when I was 5. Yeah.
Wow.
Is the caption, "We're looking for a cure"? Okay, no, I'm sorry.
One of the musicians got in trouble one year for that because
Oh.
he yelled out, he said, "Are we doing that You'll Never Walk Again song?"
Uh-oh.
And everybody just turned on it. It's "You'll Never Walk Alone."
Oh, good.
Walk alone.
Well, and your dad worked with both Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin, right?
My dad managed Dean and Jerry when they were doing movies.
Wow,
Yeah,
So they go way back.
a long time.
that's amazing. Last time I saw Dean Martin was at was in the theater I'm going to tonight, the Celebrity
Oh.
Room at Bally's, and they had to wheelchair him from his suite
Aw.
backstage,
Hmm.
and he would stand up when the audience would start cheering. They'd play him on, and he'd sit in a stool in the grand piano, and he was really awful the first 3 songs. I'm thinking, it's over.
It's gone,
It's
yeah.
kind of gone. But when he warmed up
Yes.
for the next hour, he was amazing.
Oh.
He was really fun to watch. Had just a way. He died shortly after that. I spent an afternoon talking with him at the Hamburger Hamlet on Sunset.
Of course.
I know it well.
He would come in there every day at 4:00
Wow.
and sit at the bar. His son got killed in a tragic Air
And
Force
that's
training jet.
where he came down.
Yeah, changed his life.
Well, that would do it. I understand that.
But I was happy to see Jerry and Dean reunite on the
We
telethon.
were there that night.
Yeah.
Tell the story. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go
Yeah.
ahead. But I was on the orchestra that night.
Nice. Who's the guy that replaced him? Lysinger?
Oh, yes.
The young kid.
You knew him well. The piano player, and then he went in Lysinger. You know
Not
him.
Lysinger. It was. Jerry.
I'll think of it.
Yeah, Jerry treated him so bad.
Well, and then
was
he
rough.
went and worked for that singer that's kind of the last of his.
Then he went to work with Tony Bennett.
Oh yeah. Oh well, that's a gig.
And you knew him from when you were doing the Broadway show because he was a Broadway pianist too. Very talented.
Wow, it's going to bug me now.
I know.
Lee Music
Musiker.
That it is.
Lee Musiker. Thank you.
just came to me.
Yeah.
That's right.
Great musician.
Well, remember the day I loved Sammy Davis. And that was just such a big thing. I saw him. He and Ray Charles were two of my favorites. But Sammy just left it all there. So one night towards the end, Larry was going to take me backstage to meet him, which was a big thrill.
So we went into Jerry's room first.
Right.
Sat there. And
What hotel?
This was at the MGM when it was the old MGM.
Yeah, the one that caught on
And
fire.
and those I have a story about that, but for another.
Me too.
Yeah. This one is just anyway. I took her in. We were sitting at the stools. They had that upstairs. You had to go upstairs and where the dressing rooms were, and Jerry had the one when you walked down the hall. He had the main one, and Sammy had the one to the right. And I guess he was changing it. So we sat in Jerry's room. And then when the door opened and Sammy was ready to entertain or visit, I brought Margaret in, and she didn't want to come in. And you can finish the story.
Well, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but I read energy really well.
Nice.
And I went to the door and I was just stunned. I said, "Oh my God, Larry, he's not well. We need to leave him alone." And I was pushing Larry. I wanted to meet him because I just have always admired him, but I just saw he wasn't well. And so I said, "Larry, he's not well. Let's just let him be, And he's just tired. He did 2 shows, right?" I said, "No, it's more than that." And then very soon after that, it was announced he had cancer, I believe, and was gone soon. But
I had a chance to photograph him once. Sometime I'll show you the picture. It's on my Facebook stuff. But it was Sam Boyd's 80th birthday party.
wow.
Now, I was invited, and you'd think, oh, that's impressive. But there were also 14,000 other people invited. It was at the Thomas and Mack Center on
Still
UNLV.
impressive.
Yeah, it was fun. And everybody was there that night, but Sammy was just amazing. And I got some great shots of him backstage, But probably one of my favorite entertainers. He sang, he danced, he juggled.
Bojangles,
He did the gun, the World of Guns and the Keen stuff.
tap dancing, beautiful.
Yeah. One of the interesting things is that mainly because of Jack sitting in his booth, I could see 2 shows and see any show I wanted. You would watch certain entertainers would have a set. So like Johnny Carson, they'd play him on. He had a very set routine. He did also a little juggling thing and the Keen thing. And he sang 1 or 2 numbers and then they played him off. It was kind of, that's why the musicians union got mad paying those 45 pieces to sit back there and play 3 songs for the night, But if you went to the first show and then went to the late show, it was the same show. And in the next week, you'd get an act like Don Rickles, who would walk out. And from the moment they played him on, and Jack wrote his theme song, by the way.
Oh, really?
I'm a nice guy,
Yes,
don't you know?
I remember that.
Yeah, he had a great song.
That.
Well, Don Rickles would walk out, and when he grabbed the microphone, it was a totally new set. He had a lot of things in his memory, but it was a totally new set. And he would find somebody in the audience that was an accountant, and this person was a nurse, and this guy was a veterinarian. And he was really great at recalling, calling back. And so he would just work the whole show, and it was totally new. So the veterans, they were able to take a set show, but when they started the Gift of Gab, they were very entertaining and on point. And you could get a different experience every time you went.
That's great.
But some of the sets were just boring,
locked in,
locked in. You never knew. Even some of the great comedians like Joan Rivers. I interviewed her for Jack's funeral. I was on a cruise, and there were two people entertaining that cruise. On a Tuesday night was Joan Rivers. And on Thursday night in the main room was Charo.
Oh, my goodness.
So they would fly in, get on the boat that afternoon, do their 2 shows for the whole ship, then get off at midnight and hop a private plane, and they're out of the island or wherever we were parked for the night. And so I went backstage and interviewed Joan Rivers. One of the interesting things about her set is she had a file catalog in her New York apartment with over 6,000 jokes.
Oh, my goodness.
So she would go pull these little things out. Then she would have them written on cue cards. And she would lay those cue cards down by the footlights across the stage. And she would go from outside in. So the first joke she would tell, she would walk across the stage and very naturally just kind of look down real quick. And there would be the punchline. And then she'd walk to the other side of the stage and she'd see her next joke. So she would find a way to bring that into a setup. And then she'd walk and tell that joke as she walked across the stage, and then she'd work one cue card in, and there was the next punchline. And when she got to the center two, her show was over. It not only helped her pace the show, but it reminded her of all her material.
That's great.
That was kind of cool, that you see a song set, Larry. I'm sure one of the most difficult things you have to do when you are going to kind of organize a show is, first of all, pick out which hits the star, you're going to perform, and then in which order. Pacing the show is really, really important. I see that with a lot of younger acts. They don't know how to pace a show. They start at 100 miles an hour and they stay at 100 miles an hour and they end at 100 miles an hour and your ear is tired.
Well, you're singing, exhausted. We always say, scream me a ballad, because there were no soft moments. They just had to show off the big voice, and it's just exhausting to hear them so loud all the time.
I have one Joan Rivers story. I had the orchestra at the Trop when she came in. And she had a play on and a playoff of, might have been just the playoff at the end of the show, of Anchors Away.
I remember that.
And she had a thing in her contract, and she made sure we all knew about it, that we had to play the song in its entirety. Because in those days, when the curtain came down, you just stopped the orchestra.
Yeah.
Right.
It didn't matter where you were in the song. Mm-hmm. But in her contract, you had to finish the song in its entirety.
Keep that excitement going.
Either that, or she had some allegiance or loyalty to that. So I never found out why.
Maybe Edgar was in the Navy.
Yeah, I don't know.
Don't know.
Maybe,
But it was in her contract. Yeah. Do not cut that song short. So when the curtain came down, we still had another minute and a half to play.
Did you guys go to Jack's memorial?
I think we weren't here. We were.
It was very touching.
I bet.
Between when he died and when they actually had the memorial at the Las Vegas Country Club, by the Country Club Towers, it was about 3 or 4 weeks before Shirley and Ryan could get the tribute show organized. And I was on the cruise in between there, so I went back and interviewed Joan, just some stories about Jack, and she was approachable. I sat and spent 45 minutes with her in the international terminal at JFK Airport. Knew I was catching a flight to Europe, and she was coming back. And I just walked on and said, "We have a mutual friend, Jack Eglash." And she says, "Sit down." And we talked for about 40 minutes. It was great. But Charo, I'll tell you a quick story. Jack was promoting Charo because he was going to make a fortune with Charo, mainly because the acts that were playing that room were all demanding $150,000, $200,000, $300,000 to come in and do a week worth of dates. And Charo was more affordable. So he had the orchestra. He wrote a show for her. And they got this idea one time to order maracas. So they had maracas with the Sahara Hotel name put on them. And when she...
I remember that.
Yeah, when she talked Jack into buying them, she ordered a number that seemed reasonable, for the room. But when they arrived, there was 5,000 maracas with it, and it was just boxes, boxes after boxes after boxes.
That's funny.
And the first night they used them, at the end of the show, everybody in the showroom got 2 of these maracas, and she led a Congo line out into the casino. So you see Charles coming through, and here's 600 people coming and saying, the casino thought they were under attack. It was amazing. It's hard to do those things in today's world because there's separate departments.
Yes.
And high rollers used to have a lot of carte blanche. Like I had a friend, he brought a lot of groups in. It was Southern Sporting Club from North Carolina. And I used to play the accordion on a 737 airplane. It would leave Charlotte, North Carolina at 7:00 at night. Fly into Freeport, Bahamas an hour and a half later. They gamble all night. We leave at 7 in the morning. We're back at 8:30 in North Carolina. Well, this guy found I was in Las Vegas, and he said, do you still have your organ and an accordion? I said, yeah. So he says, I'm going to be at the Imperial Palace tonight. Bring your accordion. Well, that's kind of a weird request. But he was wealthy, and he treated me well, for those years. So I show up at the Imperial Palace with the accordion, and he's playing blackjack. He's blocked off a table. He's playing table maxes at all 7 hands.
Oh, my God.
And I sat next to him for about an hour and a half. And every time he'd win, I'd play Happy Days Are Here Again.
Oh, wow.
And when he would lose, I'd play the Death March, dum, dum, da, dum, dum, da, dum, da, 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 and request. Now, we had maybe 150 people piled around this table. He won almost $60,000 in that hour and a half. I later found out that he was terminal cancer. He died just a few months later. And this was his last hurrah, and the hotels really wanted to take care of him because for 30 years he'd been bringing flying gamblers in. So that was 1980, the year I moved here. Go forward to about 1995, 15 years later, I have some friends in town. We're going to see the show at the hotel. And my friend's gambling. I'm not a gambler anymore. I completely gave up 35 years ago on that. But I'm telling him the story. I'm saying, I played in this casino, the accordion. I says it was one of those nights in Vegas history that nobody will ever believe. And the dealer says, that was you. And I says, really? She said, yeah, I was here that night. I actually dealt to Tommy Forbes. I dealt to him while you played the accordion. I tell people that story, nobody believes it. And I says, I know I have the same problem.
Wow.
Scott, you're the guru of music. When did accordions become so unpopular? I mean, it's like use an accordion and go to jail on the back of bumper stick.
Shortly after they were invented.
Now, see, my family had an Italian restaurant in Fresno, and they always had an accordion player. In fact, it's the same one that ended
Dick
up.
Cantino.
Dick Cantino used to play at their restaurant.
God, yes.
Lady of Spain.
It reminds me of warm memories in that restaurant.
I have the story about Dick Cantino to show you how unpopular things became for, I don't know if I ever told you this story, but he had his prize accordion in the backseat of the car. And it was right on the seat. And he parked for a breakfast at Denny's, like late night breakfast. And he parked right by the window so he could keep an eye on the car. While he was eating, he heard the window crash. And the food came out of his mouth. He ran out to the car and he saw that the window was broken. And when he looked in, there were 2 accordions.
Exactly. Didn't he play at the Hole in the Wall?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, that the guy that owned that, it's kind of a bit of Vegas history. That restaurant, it advertises in the shadows of the Bally's, in the shadow of the Flamingo Hilton. And that's 3/4 or almost an acre of land that this guy bought when he first moved to Vegas in the 50s. He was an opera singer. And Batista's Hole in the Wall.
I remember that.
Yeah, Batista. Well, I was going into a restaurant one night circa 2005. And here comes Batista, and I'm going, oh man, how you doing? What's going on? And, I heard you sold your property. At that time, Park Place Entertainment owned the Flamingo, and they were going to tear that down and build a $2 billion resort on that property. One of these big resort, and they're still going to do that. It's not Park Place, but he says, yeah, I sold the land, and they gave me back an unlimited lease until they actually demolish and build. I can keep my restaurant there. And of course, the restaurant's still there today, 2023. And I don't know why I ask. I normally don't embarrass people, but I'm, curious. I said, do you mind if I ask how much you got for that 3/4 of an acre? And he started smiling. I'll preface by, he had a brand new, really cool pickup truck. And I said, why are you driving, 90 years, why are you driving a pickup truck at your age? And he goes, oh, I used it to haul my jet ski up to Bryant Head. And he was also self-piloting a big Beechcraft Bonanza, that he bought. But he told me $1 million for that 3/4 of an acre.
Wow.
Because the hotel needed it.
Sure.
They couldn't
Right
build. They couldn't build without him.
Had it landlocked.
But Dick Catino used to play in that hole in the wall. It was a fun place.
My favorite act in the old days was the Barasinis and the orangutan.
I have pictures of him. He did the Verino.
I loved that act when the one would flip him the bird. I just thought that was great.
Wrong way, Clyde.
Yes, that was fun.
Bobby lived about 2 blocks from me on Reno and Eastern. And
we
Jack,
were there many times.
Yeah, and he loved those animals, Clyde.
Well, that's when I first understood how people will try to demonize somebody to make money. And I was helping them with that case. And you all have seen probably the videos where it looked like he was hitting the orangutan with a stick. Well,
they said it was a metal bar, but it was a wooden with black tape.
Dowel.
Right.
Now we know how strong these animals are.
4 times human here.
Right. So if they were hurting him, they'd have torn him up. But we saw in his home a crib next to their bed where they had the babies. We saw where they had the animals. They were treated better than most people's children. They had televisions in there. They had people come in every day with fresh fruits and vegetables and all of the things they wanted. It was criminal what they did to that family.
Well, I'll tell you a quick story. I'm negotiating with Dirk Arthur to bring his big magic show, which had huge props. He had 2 Bell helicopters, but he had these tigers. And so I had Mark Trados, the entertainment attorney, draw up a showroom contract, which was very complex. It was like 60 pages. I think it cost me almost $4,000 even back then to have this contract drawn up with all the liabilities and who's responsible for this and that. So we get to the point where now I've spent all this time and energy, and I've already talked to the Plaza Hotel. We're bringing this, really big act down, and we were going to have to make some changes to the showroom, to hang cages and all kinds of keep it safe. So Dirk says to me, "Okay, I'm ready to sign the contract." So I had a master lease, so I only paid one price for the room, and then I had these other shows that I negotiated on. So Dirk says, "I won't sign this lease until you come feed the cats with me some morning."
Wow.
And I said, "You mean come out and feed the tigers?" And he goes, "Yeah." I says, "Well, what time do they eat?" He said, 7 a.m. And I says, "Oh, Dirk, I'm a night guy, but I'll be there." So I drove out Blue Diamond Road to this really beautiful compound. If you watch the Animal Planet special, you see the big sprawling, acreage for the compound. And he and Roy Horn are really responsible for saving white tigers.
Right.
There was only like 85 tigers in the world when they started this breeding program. So they single-handedly saved a species. I can say I taught a lot of kids to make music. He saved a species.
That's pretty amazing.
So I get there and we kibitz in the house a little bit and kind of just talking. And he says, "Okay, time to go feed the cats." So we walked out back and he has these huge rows of caged in. And it looks like a golf course, where they have the big fences up and things. And he has 6 big freezers and he takes a little red wagon, and he starts bringing these big 10 and 12 pound birds that are totally frozen, like Sub-Zero. And he gets like 10 of these chickens in a wagon. And then we start walking to the first cage and there's a metal drawer and he pulls it out and he puts 3 of these birds in there and closes it. And the tiger comes over and I'm standing, 2 feet watching this thing and the big tiger saber-toothed
Oh my God, that's intimidating.
And they crunch into these frozen things like they're lollipops. It just crunches right through them. And he says, "Watch that animal eat. Because it's important that you know and that you tell everybody else that goes backstage. These animals
are pets.
Trained.
Yeah.
They're trained, but they're never tamed."
Right.
So when my comedians would come in on Monday, they work Tuesday through Sunday, I'd have to have them sign a non-disclosure agreement that they wouldn't say what, because he had his Corvette that he used to levitate back there. He had the big train that all of these props were back there. And so he had a non-disclosure that the comedians wouldn't steal the act. You wouldn't show how they worked. And also that they wouldn't stick their finger in the cage and try to pet the animals.
God, you need to tell people that, huh?
What?
They had a little white baby tiger, and they wanted a name for it. So I got together with the property, and we had a 1 month long contest to name the baby tiger.
Oh.
And at the end, the name that won was Oscar, our mayor,
Of
Oscar
course,
Goodman.
that's good.
So I called the mayor's offices, you got to come over. It's a good publicity thing. So he shows up with, of course, his 2 showgirls in feathers. But the fun part of that day that I remember most was Oscar was about 3.5, 4 months old and weighed 55 pounds. And Dirk put that beautiful cat on my lap.
Oh my God.
And I scratched behind its ears and it had that deep purr. It was like a big cat. And the
Oh,
blue eyes,
beautiful.
just it still stunk,
Yeah.
The backstage smelled like cat pee for the year he had his act down there. But yeah, it was, as a matter of fact, the night Roy Horn got bit by Monocore up at the Mirage,
Yeah.
Dirk, immediately left the show and went to the hospital. They were dearest of friends. And that was the one and only time that I got interviewed by CNN. 3 nights later, they were still covering the story,
Sure.
as Roy was recovering. They were asking me if we were going to make any changes. And I spoke with Dirk and, kind of got our thoughts together. And I says, no, Dirk's been performing for 30 years without an accident. But honestly, we did put a guy wire across the stage.
Sure.
So now he would clip the cats onto the guy wire because they had the strength of 6 humans. As a matter of fact, he would drive the cats to the showroom about an hour and a half before the performance. And he had to take each cat out of he had a big truck and a trailer, and he'd have to take each cat out one at a time. And the hotel was so concerned about security that when we transported the cats from the truck to the stage and caged them behind stage and the cages back out at night to go home, they had to close the valet around the corner.
That's when those balcony seats became more valuable.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you a little inside story. I don't know if I should speak out of school, but everybody was wondering what went wrong with Monocore that night on the stage. And so I'll give you a suggested idea of what might have gone wrong, okay? When Siegfried and Roy were young at their business, at showmanship, they at the Stardust in the Lido show, replacing Bobby Bear singing on and off, right? He would treat those cats like they were children. They would come home and sleep with them on their compound up on the west side, So he woke up in the morning and he had a relationship. He fed the animals. He knew if they had a bad day, if one had a toothache or a headache or something, And Dirk did that. If you have an animal, he had a leopard, gorgeous. You wouldn't think it was old, but the leopard was like 14 years old and had arthritis, and it had to come out of this little mirrored ball, and then he'd set the lid on fire, and then the cat would come up and sit on the, and the cat had bad days. It just had days when it was, didn't feel good, and he had to bring out the young protege that was learning and retire the cat. Well, at any rate, when they got more famous and Steve Wynn wanted more and more people to come to their dressing room and the secret garden and all that stuff, after the show, instead of tending to the kids, they would go and entertain all these corporate people backstage. And then they built the secret garden so the kids didn't come home and sleep at night, and had different handlers. And they would show up, before the show and get in their costumes, and maybe they wouldn't say hi to the kids, And all of a sudden,
the relationship
changed with the cats. So that night that he got bit was the night after he had his 60th birthday party, where there was some partying and things going on. I'm not saying he was a drinker, but everybody had champagne, and it was one of those things. On the choker collar was a big round ring that he would put his finger through, and these animals are used to cues, very specific cues. And that night on that stage at the Mirage, he missed that ring.
Oh.
And the animal didn't, Monocore, which was a 650-pound beast.
Yes.
Didn't get his cue. He didn't do his thing. So Roy tapped him on the nose with the microphone, like Bobby Berezini.
Oh.
And the cat didn't take the cue.
Uh-oh.
So he taps the cat harder on the nose. And people say the story put out by publicity was Roy had a stroke and Monaco was trying to carry him off the stage.
Yes, I heard that.
You've
I
heard that story, right? Those cats, they were so proficient at killing in the wild that they could look and see where the carotid artery
jugular is.
Yeah, the jugular vein, yeah. And that cat bit him in the jugular and drug him off stage. And Roy just bled profusely. Had a stroke right there on the stage. The last words that Roy did say, though, was, "Don't put Monocore down."
Oh, because he loved them.
He loved
course.
Yeah, and they didn't. They didn't put the cat down. But yeah, working closely around those animals.
That had to be amazing.
It was pretty amazing. And they were so beautiful, but you learned really quickly not to put your finger in the cage.